Good afternoon. On behalf of Cenosco, it's my pleasure to welcome you to our 24th Asset Integrity webinar. My name is Tomislav Renic. I'm a technical writer at Cenosco, and I'll be the host for today's webinar. So the topic for today's webinar is corrosion under insulation. What we're going to be covering during the presentation is our experts will be talking a bit about their experience with CUI programs, some of the latest developments in non-destructive testing. We'll move on to a bit of a discussion about coatings and insulation, some of the standards and codes that pertain to CUI and inspections, and then talk about prioritization, risk-based inspections. And once that part of the discussion is done, we'll move on to the question and answer period. I would like to introduce our guests. First off, I'll introduce Christos Christoglou. Christos holds a PhD in chemical engineering and a Master of Science in materials science with research in automotive and aerospace sectors. He led Bayer's RBI team and built Covestro's inspection management team in Germany. He's now EMEA asset manager at Ineo Styrolution, a leading global supplier of styrenic solutions. Christos represents the company and industry groups, including as deputy chairman of the DIN Maintenance Committee and as a CEN member. Welcome, Christos.
Thank you, Tomislav. Welcome, everyone.
And our second guest is Marco Verdes, domain expert with Cenosco. Marco is a globally recognized expert in the petrochemical industry with over 30 years of experience in asset integrity and reliability. As a pioneer in asset integrity management system, he has led global initiatives, optimized frameworks, and integrated our product IMS with systems like SAP and other CMMSs. With expertise in inspections, audits, and corrosion management, he's a trusted advisor known for his technical excellence. Welcome, Marco.
Hey, thank you, Tomislav, and welcome, everybody.
Before we get into the discussion, I just want to outline some of the framework for the discussion. So Marco and Verdes will be leading the discussion once I sign off. Following the discussion, we will open the floor for some questions. We've already received a few questions in advance, but please feel free to drop any additional questions into the chat. If we have time, we'll try to address them. If not, we can try to get to them after the presentation. One last note before we move on to the actual discussion. If for any reason you have a bad connection, refreshing your browser should bring you right back into the presentation. So with that short introduction, I will hand the reins of the presentation over to Christos and Marco. Chris.
Thank you, Tomislav.
Yep, thank you. So when you look, give me 1 second. So when you look at CUI, right? So CUI, corrosion under insulation, it is not the most difficult to manage degradation mechanism, right? Is one of them, but it is a program as well. Okay, so it's not a specific degradation that you can do an inspection and you're done, right? So it is really a program, and it takes a multidiscipline approach. Okay, it's not just a one, discipline that is in charge of the CUI program, right? It takes multiple disciplines to work on it. Okay, from maintenance, from the production team, from process team, and of course asset integrity teams, right? One of the key challenges, right, is that it's hidden. You don't see it, right? That's the main challenge, right? That you're walking and you see CUI, right? So now you can see something growing from the insulation. That gives you some idea. They get some moisture, right? But it doesn't mean that you have CUI if your coating is okay underneath, right? And it's expensive when you try with the amount of equipment that you have insulated at your site, right? It can become very expensive to do a proper CUI program, right? So that's when you need to start looking at new technologies. You need to start looking how you manage your program as a whole, not just a one-off, exercise or one-off, um, activity. You need to be look at it, from top to bottom and say, okay, how you build and maintain a CUI program. Okay, uh, the numbers of how much it costs yearly to the industry. I think we don't have a really accurate number because it's more than what we estimate, right? Because some,
Exactly.
it doesn't get reported, okay, how many issues you have with CUI, for every single leak you have, but it's really, 2.5 trillion. It could be really more. Okay, uh, it is one of the main challenges that we see at not just refineries, right, but any plant that you have insulated equipment, and it is a challenge to keep an efficient CUI program, right? So one of the things, Chris, I don't know if you want to add something before I start talking about how we did our CUI program in one of the sites I work.
Marco, maybe just one addition. So it's a challenge for existing plants that have an age, let's say, over 15 years. So they have already corrosion under insulation, but probably don't know where exactly to look for it. And then we have the new plants or plants that are being built or under planning, where sometimes, if you're not careful, you will not apply a correct coating insulation system that will then lead to CUI much sooner than it should and could.
Yes, I remember one example in one site. I think in less than 2 years, right? One of the new projects, we have a CUI leak, right? And we saw very high corrosion rates due to multiple factors, right? But even that you have new projects, okay, or new units, that doesn't mean, okay, that you have 10 years that you don't have to worry about. Okay, because sometimes the QA, QC, or other factors, okay, it created a
Exactly.
problem that is hidden for you. Okay,
Exactly.
uh, yeah. So when we build the CUI program, at least the CUI program I was involved, okay, because there's multiple ways to build a CUI program, right? But the one we built, the first thing we did was we built a team, right? So we got a representative from the production team, okay, because they were key. For us to get the permits, okay, they were key for us to say, look, if we remove insulation from here with the process engineer, right? They were able to tell us, Marco, we need to put a temporary insulation in place. We cannot just leave it open, okay, and be there for 2 months if you have a column, right? So things like that. So you need to have a team, production, safety as well, right? Safety is, of course, very important. We had to deal with asbestos. We had to deal with some lead paint and things like that. So safety was always involved in, we have a lot of scaffold. We have a lot of, people in and out and encapsulated areas, right? So the team really need to be on board and aligned, okay, and everybody pushing in the same direction. Of course, you have maintenance, and you're going to have different contractors as well, right? But you need to build the team and have the right expectation, right? I talked, a few weeks ago in the Hague, right? That you need to have the right attitude, right? So the integrity mindset, the integrity attitude, well, for CUI is very important, right? So you build your team, you need to determine the scope. Okay, so how many equipment is insulated? Okay, uh, if you go to a lot of sites, they don't have really a good understanding how many equipment is insulated. So we need to know how many equipment is insulated, and from there you need to prioritize. That's the tricky part. Okay, how you gonna prioritize? You got 3,000 pieces of equipment that are insulated. How you prioritize those? Where you gonna
Exactly.
start, right? Where you gonna start? And of course, you start with the light, and you start with the things that if it leak, it's gonna be something very impactful for environment, for people, and of course for the assets, right? Uh, and then one of the things that we did that I think it worked really well, we have a couple contractors working. Okay, so they did the coating and installation was one, right? And we had two contractors doing that, and then we had two contractors doing a scaffold. And what that did for us is that it created a competition. Okay, that if you have only one contractor, sometimes you don't get the best performance. But having that little competition, it actually increased the performance, and we were giving whoever was performing better receive more work, right? And we were giving the contractor work, of course, without skipping on safety. Okay, that was very important because for us, if you did a lot of work but you were unsafe, and we see safety department seeing that things are you have a lot of issues with safety, then it was not worth it. So we didn't want somebody to rush the job to meet certain KPIs, right? But on the other hand, being very unsafe, right? So it needs to be a balance. Good performance, but safety needs to be top priority. Otherwise, all the work that you did, if somebody get hurt, then it's for nothing, right? So I think it's very important to have those pillars and to make sure that everybody understand safety first, right? But we need to move. We need to be being proactive and learn from what we've been doing, right? So during a CUI program, there is a lot of learning to be captured. Okay, so it's not one time that you write your procedure or you do your flow chart and then you move on. So you need to uh, keep learning and improving what you have, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So
then
in the end, you
what?
have to go out there and do the work in the field. And it's always a bit tricky because um, even the best program will not be successful always 100%. So let's say you have your management buy-in and you decide on a location that you want to invest money to build a scaffolding, remove the insulation to check what's beneath it, and you don't find any issues beneath it. Then suddenly you hear comments like, what are you doing? Is your RBI program sound? And probably somewhere else where you didn't expect it, something happens. So this can happen. So probably for the people joining us today, there is no one solution. You follow this and then 100% everything is well and fixed.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the other thing, depending on the facility that you work on, but I work in a very old facility, or I call old, right? But there was a lot of things that were kind of hidden for us, right? Like asbestos, for example, on insulation, right? So when we started in some of the units, we knew that we were dealing with possible asbestos. So we tested all the insulation before we remove anything. Okay, uh, removing insulation is tricky, right? Because sometimes, okay, it's what holding the pipe together. To be honest, we've seen in the industry, yeah, we've seen in the industry that sometimes the insulation was holding the pipe together, and then somebody remove it and started leaking, right? So it CUI is a very challenging, not just degradation but program, because it has a lot of moving parts, right? And everybody needs to be on the same page and fully focus on getting things done, right? Um, so what other thing that we did was we tried to capture the information as is. So when we say we're going to work on this piping system or this equipment, we took a lot of pictures, we did a lot of of the inspection, visual inspection on the insulation assist, and then we were mapping, because when you remove insulation, right, you're going to find some spot that the insulation look good, right? So you're going to find some corrosion in areas that you were not expecting. Okay, so it's not as simple that everything is going to be in the suspected areas, right? So but I don't know, 80 to 90% maybe in the susceptible areas you're going to find that corrosion. So we were making that comparison. This is how it looked before the installation. This is the area that we have, coating damage and CUI, and try to see, okay, can we do something in the future that we can just go to those spot areas, right, and look for problems, right? And that's some of the things that you need to be looking for. Okay, how you improve the way you find CUI. Okay, we're gonna be talking later, Christos, on NDT, right?
Exactly, yeah. And definitely, Marco, what you were just saying, it's also a budget issue. If you have the money to, let's say, strip large areas of piping or of equipment where you suspect you might have CUI, then you're free to do it. If you don't have the budget, you need to go into the details and really find the spots that only their CUI may be happening and strip only those spots to keep the cost down. So that's another factor you
Yeah.
need
So
to calculate.
yeah, I'm gonna give you two really good examples on cost, because that's one of the main concern, right? That you know, you need to keep the cost to a certain level, right? And I remember one site, they did a full column, right? Because the consequence was 5, so the highest consequence was 5, so they did a full column, but the column has been painted and reinsulated 6 years before, and they didn't find anything, and they spent $1 million just doing that one, and then the consequence is not gonna move, right? So you need to use the money smart, okay? You really, just because you spend $5 million a year at your site, that doesn't mean you have a good CUI program. The neighbor next to you might be using 3 million, but you have a more efficient CUI program that is doing more meters or square foot. Okay, or it could be doing more high risk equipment, right? So just
Exactly.
because you're spending a ton of money in CUI doesn't mean that you're doing a lot of really good CUI work. Yeah, and is that
You're right.
sustainable, right? Over time.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So the other example I'm gonna give you is that we created a good partnership with the unit. Okay, so the unit that we were working, because we said, look, for the project, CUI project, we're gonna address the main column, for example. Okay, but we have all the scaffold in place. Okay, this is the time to address all the piping that is coming down in that column. Okay, so we partner with the unit, with the pump, okay, the production unit manager, and we said, listen, the project is going to pay for the whole thing, but you're going to pay for all the piping coming down, because a couple of the piping were high risk, but the other were not. Okay, so we will not have touched it based on risk, but they covered that cost because that was the right place or the opportunity to be proactive, clean and coat, and the one that were not insulated, they got coated as well. So when we move out of that column, all the piping coming down, okay, it was coated or brand new insulation and coating, right? So it takes a little bit of proactive and work between the project team and the run and maintain team as well. Okay.
Hmm. Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah.
And I
So let
think
me go ahead.
so. Talking about inspection, that's what I wanted to.
Yeah.
Please.
So yeah. So when we ask, we receive about 200 plus attendees, right? So we have a lot of people registered, 200 plus registered. So we ask, okay, what is the biggest challenge, okay, that you have at your site? And by far the biggest challenge that we see on days, each company see, right? More than 36 company participated in this. It was identification and detection. Okay, we still struggle to detect the CUI or the area with CUI. Okay, so it's gonna come to the point when we're gonna be able to put a couple sensors here and there and detect CUI, okay, efficiently. But as of right now, identifying CUI areas, is the biggest challenge, almost 40%. The whole program, the implementation of the program is about 18%, 17%, because it really takes more than just the asset integrity team or just the maintenance team. Okay, it takes a lot of people to really have an efficient program and get it to the long term, right? For the long run, because it is gonna happen. So the CUI, if is when it's gonna happen, right? So you really need to have this program for the long run, set up for the long run. Uh, the next one was the access, insulation and removal. Okay, that's another challenge, right? Because you can do a lot of things with rope access, but it will require some scaffolding. It will require some encapsulating the area, cocoon and things like that. So that's a challenge as well. Cost, like we said earlier, right? So about 9%, cost is one of the issues, right? Intermittent conditions, right? This is another challenge,
Exactly.
right? That
Mhm.
when it's running is above the CUI curve, right, or the range, so you're not so concerned. But then when you get shut down for 3 6 months or whatever is the time, then it gets corroding. Okay, so those systems, being able to say how many you have, how many systems you have that are in intermittent condition, that is a challenge, and you should, that when you work with the process engineer, with the production specialist, right, and figure out what are my systems that are like that. Or you might have a dead leg, okay, or branch, okay, that work at a different temperature than the main pipe, okay, which might bring that branch to a CUI range. And then other examples. But I think these were the things that people highlighted were the main issues they see.
And Marco, I would say that probably the 40, almost 40% identification detection, a part of the people that mentioned this as the biggest challenge are maybe looking for a shortcut to not implement a CUI program. So just give me the solution. Where do I need to go in order to detect CUI? Um,
Yeah.
they're not going to find the answer in this webinar and probably in no webinar or
Well,
no podcast
I
at all.
I think the answer they're gonna find it, but there is no shortcuts, right, for CUI. It's been happening for 100 years, right? And we know how to address it, but uh, you need to look for ways to do it efficiently, and that's the key. How you can run a
Exactly.
CUI program efficiently? How can you go after the high risk equipment, right? Things that if you leak, you're gonna create a problem, right? And then try to manage that, learn from that, and you know keep using the latest technology as well, right? We're going to talk a little bit about insulation and coding and sensors, right? Start embracing, okay, what is out there, okay, and start using, incorporating over time into your program. That's another thing. It should not be a program that you started 10 years ago and it has the same methodology, okay? You need to keep evolving, keep improving, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because the methodologies are also evolving and improving. So this here are just some of the examples. So the traditional is the visual inspection. That's the easiest that you can do if you have knowledgeable people.
Hmm.
Have them walk around your plant and check the condition of the insulation system. Do they see openings where water might have found its way in? And then start analyzing where this water could have ended up to cause the corrosion. I remember one discussion I had with a plant over 10 years ago, where the technicians told us that every spring after a heavy winter with rain and snow, they do their rounds, and when they find openings in the insulation, they close them so that engineers and management don't need to bother with them. And I said, okay, that's very well meant from you, but it's a mistake because the water is probably still in there, corroding your pipe or your equipment somewhere. So you need to discuss this.
Yeah.
You don't need to just really fix it, close it so that nobody cares and nobody sees it anymore.
Yeah.
So you see here, the slide is one example that Mark already told you. You need to keep up, so you can't have a program or some methodology that you came up with 10 years ago and it worked, because many of the methodologies here didn't exist, or maybe they existed, but not with the high-tech equipment that exists today that can do a better analysis, go further, is more versatile, is lighter because some of this equipment had a weight of around 20, 30 kilograms. So people have to go up and down scaffolding with them to reach your equipment, your piping. That was definitely something that didn't make it easier in the past. So you see, there are NDT methodologies that you can use on insulated piping mostly, not so much equipment with vertical surfaces. And of course, in a chemical plant, for example, you have a lot of nozzles, a lot of teeth, and so on. So many of these methodologies can maybe go up to tens or hundreds of meters, but that's impossible in a cramped chemical plant where you have all these teeth and elbows. So you have to move the equipment probably every 2, 5, 8 meters to another position and then do your check again. It's different when you have a large pipeline there. You can just use many of the methodologies much easier. The last one, which is something that I personally like lately, is the use of sensors. And there are many companies lately, let's say not many, I know a handful of them, offering solutions with sensors that you can apply on the outside of your cladding, on the outside of your insulation system, and they can measure or they can analyze and see if you have humidity, if you have water under your insulation, and you can even see it on a screen how it's moving from this location to that location with a date. So you can say, okay, on that day it was raining, so I can see heavy water ingress. Then for the next 3 days, I see it moving to a different location. Then a heat wave comes and it's out again. And you see where you have water ingress, but you don't see if you have corrosion under insulation. There are also some sensors that can measure corrosion, but those you really have to apply on your base metal. That's something more complicated, and that's not something that you will just do for hundreds of equipment.
Yeah, if you look at the feedback we receive from the different companies, right, the different people that are in this call, right, the most used NDT was visual inspection. The second one was X-ray, different type of X-ray, and the third one was PEC, right, the pulse eddy current. But those were the top three NDT being used at the moment.
Exactly. Yeah. And definitely, it depends also on where you are on this planet. Probably you don't have every major NDT company offering all the solutions near you, so that's also something that you need to consider. Some in Europe especially are in big camp parks with other companies, so your equipment is very close to the equipment of other companies, and you can't just do whatever you want when you are doing your inspections. Others have this flexibility, so there are a lot of reasons that you might choose one methodology over another.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And you might use one to scan, big areas, okay, guided ultrasonic or something. Scan a big area, and then you focus on that area. If you have any finding, anything that you need to be follow up, right? So you might
Exactly.
use a combination of NDT technique as well. Just one. It's not one NDT for everything, right? And same with X-ray, right? If it's 10-inch or 12-inch, and how you gonna X-ray that, right? So you might need to do something different.
True. So you are going to do your risk analysis, and that's something that we are going to discuss later in this discussion with
Yeah,
Marco. And then based on those high risk locations, you need to decide what you're going to do, how you're going to inspect them, visual inspection, stripping, or one of these methodologies, or it's a very important piece of equipment for you and you install some sensors, permanent sensors there. Yeah.
that's right.
So I think that wraps up a little bit what you can do when you're looking for corrosion and insulation, but we also have the topic what you can do in order to delay corrosion and insulation, and that would be to have a proper insulation system in place.
Yeah, so insulation is very important, right? Because you need to find that balance between the cost of the insulation and how effective it is, right? Because if that insulation holds a lot of moisture, and then it's gonna be a problem for you in the long run, right? So sometimes it's better to put a better insulation that maybe you pay a little bit more in front, but on the long run is way better. There's a lot of technologies out there. Aerogel is used everywhere. We got good folks from Armacell. They really have taken it to the next level as far as no holding, moisture, and really using the latest technology. And it really, the insulation keeps improving. So uh, look in the market, see what are they offering, okay? Because what we used to use, 10, 20 years ago, now it has been improved. Now you don't need that much insulation, and it's always important to see, do you really need insulation? Because sometimes 5%, at least in our project, 5% of the piping, it didn't need insulation, okay? So some of that, we just didn't put any insulation back, okay? So we left the insulation completely off, right? Some of them we just put a cage or something, so personal protection, right? But
Exactly.
if you're gonna be looking for insulation, check out aerogel, check out other technologies. Armacell is really good, and I've seen a lot of improvement over the years, right, on what is done with insulation. And then again, one insulation is not going to fit all the scenarios that you have, okay?
Yeah.
So for insulation, you need to be looking for, each piping or, each equipment, you need to have a different type of insulation,
Yeah.
right? Different temperatures require different insulation. Um, so always, challenge yourself, right? When you're in a CUI program, do I have the right insulation in this piping system or in this equipment, right?
Yeah. And
Because
it's the
sometimes,
system in the end.
well, and sometimes in the project stage, okay, they're not gonna go with the best insulation. They're gonna go with something, you know, maybe standard or something that is good enough, okay, for that equipment for 10, 20 years. The reality is that equipment might be used 40 years or 60 years, right? So you need to be thinking, okay, if I'm replacing this insulation now, I'm gonna go and replace in kind, or I'm gonna put an insulation that's gonna set me up, for success in the next,
Yeah.
20, 30 years, right?
I have some examples there, Marco, actually. So sometimes you want to reduce the cost and you want to reuse the cladding because the cladding is in good condition. You can add the few, let's say, missing pieces. So in order to do so, you're more or less obliged to use the same type of insulation so that you end up with the same diameter, with the same dimensions. Otherwise, you need a new cladding, and that would probably add several 100,000 or a couple of million on top.
But
And
but that's the whole idea of having the team that discuss this kind of things, right?
exactly. Yeah.
And
Um,
if you can
I,
reuse the
I have an
cladding,
example.
go for it.
Sorry, yes. I even have an example where we had a similar equipment in different locations of the world. One was in Texas, where it's warmer than in Central North Europe. And there we removed the insulation, or my colleagues removed the insulation and applied a thermal insulation coating. I think it was from Mascot, the company. And it's a few millimeters thick, doing both the work of the coating and the insulation, so you don't need a cladding, and you can see it if it gets damages. But that's not the solution we want to go with in Europe, where we have a cold, harsh winter with lots of rain, lots of wind, and snow in the winter. So we were afraid that it might not hold the temperatures. But the system is definitely, you need to take care of your coating. So depending on your construction material, not all coatings are for stainless and carbon steel the same. Then you need your insulation. Then you need your cladding in a way applied that it does not allow water ingress. So some plants in the past used to coat everything. Some other plants, even within the same company, just installed an insulation without a coating, and some 45 years later, sometimes nobody knows if a coating was ever applied, and even if it was, probably after 45 years, it's not there anymore. So you need to consider the coating, the coating, insulation, cladding system, and how long do you want it to last.
Yeah.
And then you need to do a good quality control during construction, during installation, because even you may be paying for the best system, but you may not get it in the end.
Well, but that's the thing, right? So, in not just having the best coding, selected, right? Is okay the QA and QC, right? Make sure you have a good program in place that you don't code oversalts or under conditions that are not beneficial for the coding, right? So the other thing when removing coding, because if you're gonna be blasting, right, and removing when removing coding, then you need to be careful because sometimes you might be dealing with lead, right, and things like that. So it depends what is the scenario you're going through. Yeah.
I mean, you even have to choose the time of the year, good, because if it's raining and you want to remove and reinstall a new insulation, you will need to make it waterproof so that people can work and keep everything dry, which increases the cost again. That's why usually everybody is doing this only in summer. So I think for this system, painting, coating, insulation, cladding, we probably could have a 2-hour discussion on
Absolutely.
this. And I think in the end, some of you would say, yeah, but you didn't cover this or that. So that's definitely a very detailed topic. And if you don't have in-house experts, you just need to hire people, hire a contractor who knows
Yeah.
and can
Absolutely.
help you really.
That brings us to the standards and recommended practices, right?
Yes, exactly. So um, just to give you a little bit of help, what you can read or your engineers can read in order to know a little bit more about CUI. So there's the one that probably everybody who joined us today knows, the API 583, which is the recommended practice for corrosion and insulation and fireproofing, which is, I think, something everybody has heard of and has probably. Then there's the AMPP 198, which is a standard practice for the control of corrosion under insulation. And so this is how we tried with Marco to a little bit explain what each of these standards covers and what you can use it for. Then there is the DNV RP 109, and I think the new version just came out or is coming out this month, which is a more holistic approach, explaining everything to you. And there is a European book, actually, it's a little green book, number 55, from the European Association for Corrosion, which discusses the prevention of corrosion and insulation, which is for me, again, something that covers a little bit of everything. It's not so much for the specialist, for the technician who goes outside to look for the issues, but I think it's something that every reliability or inspection engineer should have in his library and should take a look at. Probably or not probably, certainly there are some more literature you can find out there, but if you have those four or at least some of those four, I think you're already on a very good way to understand what's happening and how you can tackle the issue. Marco, not sure if you have anything to add on these standards and recommended
No,
practices.
the thing is, depending on the country that you're working in, right? Depending on the region, they might follow one standard or another one. So don't think that just one standard is going to cover everything. They're all very similar. They overlap a lot. Okay, and I think
Yeah,
they all have a lot of really good information, good guidance. Okay, but at the end of the day, you need to look at the site that you're working on. Okay, and how can you apply those recommended guidelines? I will say into the work process that you have. Okay.
yeah, exactly.
And then
The other
last
thing
part.
besides standards, sorry, Marco, is of course if you have knowledgeable people. I had the luck, and I have to say this, when I first joined Bayer, then Covestro, now at Ineos, I have the luck of finding real experts that taught me many things. So if you have those people in your company or in companies you know of, cling to them because their knowledge is worth gold.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yep. And the last part of this, podcast, right? We talk a little bit about the prioritization and the risk base. Okay. Even that, CUI is a consequence, based approach. Normally, you do a lot of the higher, consequence, highest risk. We will approach those. When you do RBI, it doesn't matter if it's API RBI or if you do SRBI or any risk-based program that you do, right? It needs to be well thought out. You need to be realistic, okay, with the approach. If you are too conservative, then everything is gonna be very high risk, and then you are in the same problem, right? Because now you got a very, high risk list of equipment that maybe they're not, right? So you really need to work when you do a CUI program and when you're gonna do an RBI on CUI, you really need to have, the team, okay? Because it should not be just the asset integrity or the corrosion engineer. You need to have the production and process in place as well, so you can really look at, okay, what is the risk of this equipment from failing? What happened if this leaked for 10 minutes, let's just say, or something like that? Do we have any mitigation in place, something like that, right? So
Yeah.
when looking at the risk, okay, of that asset, okay, you need to be looking at the process, the temperature rate. Temperature is very important, right? Because depending on what temperature it works, yeah, it's more likely or less likely to happen the CUI. You're going to see different corrosion rates, right? So it's very important to put all this information together to try to prioritize, right? And that's one of the biggest challenges with CUI, how we can prioritize thousands of equipment, okay, that have very similar, you have coating and you have insulation, but how can we start on number one and go all the way to number 3,000, right,
Yeah.
efficiently, and how we can reduce risk, because at the end of the day, what you're trying to do is we're trying to reduce risk, okay, how much risk we have there, and when we mitigate this risk, okay, what is the gain, what are we gaining by doing this mitigation, right? So
Definitely. What I say sometimes, because for the technical people, usually the consequence of a failure is more difficult to evaluate than the probability. So I say you could start with a probability. That's the example on the table here on the left side. And then when you have your high probability areas, look at the consequence and discuss this with operations and decide then on the hopefully few locations that you
yeah,
really need to take a closer look at, or you need to do NDT, you need to strip, you need to install some sensors, because even the sensors, you can't just cover your whole plant and units with sensors from top to bottom, probably unless you have the money to do. So
well,
um,
and when you have an RBI program for CUI, you need to come with an inspection strategy. Okay, you're not just doing a risk ranking and you have, okay, very high risk and then coming down. But okay, if you have a high risk, you need to have a strategy. What are we doing? Delagging 100%. If you have something lower, okay, what are we gonna do? 100% of susceptible area or 50%, but you need to have an inspection strategy based on the risk that you have, okay? And the size or the companies that really establish a well thought out program and that they stick to the plan, those are the one that have better results.
and definitely, so the real work starts after you're done with your analysis on paper and you go out there to fix something or to inspect something. Then the actual cost comes, and then the actual work comes, and that's something you need to consider as well.
Well, and the the last thing I'm gonna say about this is that you need to capture all this information, right? Of course, we want you to do it in IMS, but you need to capture in the asset integrity management system that you're using, because it's very important to see, okay, what's going on. Do you have, what corrosion rate do you have? What are other areas that you need to be looking, and how much risk you have in there, right? So all these need to be captured. You cannot just have spreadsheets here, spreadsheet there, somewhere, right? You need to be captured in a one place.
Gentlemen, I'm going to have to cut you off for the discussion section of it. We've only got a couple of minutes left for questions. I will direct this one to Marco. Marco, I guess the question is about prioritization. So why not use a sensor before removing insulation to lower cost and scope? So you only strip where it's necessary based on the data. How would you respond to that question?
Can you come back and slow down a little bit?
Yeah, sorry. Why not use a sensor? Why would you not use a sensor before removing insulation, to lower the cost and scope of your exploratory program, and only strip where it's necessary?
Yeah, but here's the thing. You can put a sensor today, okay? And maybe you don't see any moisture today, but the corrosion has been happening for 10, 15 years, okay? And it might leak even if it doesn't have much moisture today. You might have other areas that have higher moisture level, but the coating is intact, okay? So just adding a sensor right now, it doesn't tell you the story on the last 20 years of that piping system, okay? So yes, sensor will help you see from today moving forward, okay, how much moisture you have. It's not gonna tell you how's the coating in that area.
Thank you. Christos, I'll direct this question at you. Can you provide the best solution or a couple of solutions to prevent or avoid ingress of water into insulation?
Definitely. One would be don't insulate your equipment. Second would be build a building all around it. But in the end, it's what we discussed earlier with Marco. It's the whole insulation system. So you need a coating, you need an insulation, and you need a good cladding. Think of the tiles on your roof or of your house that overlap so that the water just does not get into your living room or your bedroom. And that's something you need to inspect regularly and fix regularly. If you just build it and leave it like it is for 30 years, probably even your house won't hold, or your tiles on your roof won't hold. That's the only way, actually.
Excellent. We've only got time for, I think, one more question, maybe two. We'll see. Marco, what should be done when the insulation loses its containment capacity and you need to replace a large section of insulation? So let's say a planned shutdown doesn't allow enough time to remove that insulation, inspect it, apply coating, and do all of that. What would be your approach in that situation? How do you deal with that from a management perspective?
Well, you need to look at the risk, okay? You need to look at the risk. What is the risk of that equipment, okay? If that thing leaks and it had to, it shut you down for I don't know how many weeks, right? So you need to see, can you do something during the turnaround, and then after the turnaround, can you continue working on it, okay? A lot of the insulation work can be done after turnaround, okay? Some of that, it cannot be done, it can only be done during turnaround. So it's a case-by-case scenario, but management need to be looking at the risk, and the asset integrity team and your maintenance should be giving them options, right? If we do something very quickly right now, it's gonna last 4 years, that's fine. In the next turnaround, we do a proper repair, replacement, or we do something right now that maybe extend the turnaround. However, we eliminate completely the risk, right? So it's gonna depend the scenario, but you need to be looking at several scenarios. There's not just one answer gonna solve all the problem for that specific one.
Tomislav, Marco, what I always say is, as engineers, we need to do our analysis and provide the information and the scenarios to management so that management can do informed decision making. So it's up to management to accept the risk or not accept it, and then invest the money to reduce it, to mitigate it.
Gentlemen, unfortunately, our time has run out. Christos, thank you. Marco, thank you very much. To all the participants, the viewers, thank you for watching. If you've submitted a question, we'll try to get back to you after the webinar. It might take us a couple of days to get back to you. This webinar will be available for download on the Cenosco website in a day or two. And finally, before we go, I'd like to mention that we're already planning our next webinar, which is on July 30th. And the topic is emerging approaches to risk-based inspections. Please check out the details on cenosco.com. Once again, Christos, Marco, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.